My cutthroat new boss thought he could obliterate my life's work with one brutal betrayal, but he's about to face a seismic downfall for daring to cross me. 16 years and not even a handshake. I'm Silas Navarro, 53 years old, senior driver at Peak Pulse Freight out of Omaha, Nebraska. Been with them since they had just 4 trucks and a dream. Now they had 35 rigs, contracts with some of the biggest distributors in the Great Plains, and a new operations manager who didn't know the first thing about loyalty. When Peak Pulse got bought by some investment firm last summer, I knew changes were coming. Just didn't think they'd start with me. The new ops manager, Wyatt Langston, had an MBA in polished boots that had never seen the inside of a truck cab. He'd been eyeing my salary for weeks, making comments about legacy costs in meetings. That morning, I'd pulled in from a 4-day haul to Salt Lake City, on time like always, when Wyatt called me into his glass-walled office. "You're bleeding us dry, Navarro," Wyatt snarled, his voice thick with contempt. "Your time's up." The termination papers were already printed out. My replacement, some kid fresh out of driving school, was waiting in the break room. "You're throwing away trust," I said, my voice low and seething, locking eyes with him. "This will destroy you, Wyatt." "We need to streamline operations," Wyatt said, not meeting my eyes. "It's nothing personal, just numbers. Your salary is nearly double what we can pay a new driver." I nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't tell him that Prairie Provisions had been shipping exclusively with us for 9 years because I helped their dock manager move his sister's furniture when the retirement home closed. Didn't mention that Great Plains Distributing renewed their contract 4 times because I always found a way to make their emergency shipments happen, even on holidays. 16 years of perfect safety records. Never missed a delivery window, known every client by name. "You're making a catastrophic mistake," I warned, my tone cold and resolute. "You'll regret this, Wyatt." "Severance is 3 weeks," Wyatt continued, pushing the papers across his desk. "Company policy." I signed without reading, handed over my keys, my security badge, and my company credit card, said thank you for the opportunity. In the parking lot, I sat in my pickup for almost an hour. Not angry, just thinking. About the clients who'd become something like friends over the years. About the holiday cards I got from shipping managers across 7 states. About how this Wyatt didn't understand that in this business, shipments moved on relationships as much as diesel. My phone buzzed. Text from Clive Peterson himself. "Heard what happened. Those corporate fools called me. Call me now." Then, another from Nora at Great Plains. "This true about you leaving? Let's talk before you sign anywhere else." By the time I pulled out of Peak Pulse's lot, 4 more messages had come in. I didn't answer right away, just drove home. "They've underestimated me," I muttered, my hands gripping the wheel, a fire igniting in my chest. They'd fired a driver but lost something worth a whole lot more. I started at Peak Pulse back when it was just old man Harlan and his daughter trying to build something. Harlan taught me everything. How to navigate prairie blizzards, how to talk to clients, how to solve problems on the road without calling in. "You're the heart of this, Silas," Harlan once said, his voice warm with pride. "Trust is what keeps us rolling. The freight business isn't about trucks," he'd say. "It's about trust." For 16 years, I'd built that trust 1 mile at a time. When the big snowstorm hit Des Moines in 2018, I was the one who got the emergency rations through to 4 community centers. When floods washed out the main highway to Lincoln, I found the back roads. When Prairie Provisions needed an emergency shipment of equipment after a factory breakdown, I drove straight through 42 hours to make it happen. My wife, Celeste, knew the drill. Sometimes I'd be gone for days, but I always came back with stories. Our kids grew up with me on the road half the time, but they never doubted I'd be there for the important stuff. Missed some soccer games, sure, but never a prom or anniversary. When Harlan sold the company 6 years back, things started changing, slowly. At first, new policies, more paperwork, less flexibility. The new management kept me on because the clients asked for me by name. "Send Silas," they'd say. "We know it'll get there if he's driving." Wyatt arrived 8 months ago, fresh from some big logistics outfit in Denver. Started talking about performance metrics and driver rotation. Didn't understand why we let certain clients set their own delivery windows. Couldn't figure out why Prairie Provisions got priority treatment. They're not our biggest account, he'd argue in meetings. No, I'd explain, but they're our most loyal. Been with us since the beginning. Loyalty's a myth, Wyatt scoffed in one meeting, his voice dripping with scorn. Only margins matter now. He'd smile that corporate smile. Loyalty doesn't show up on balance sheets. I noticed the cracks forming. Started hearing whispers about rate hikes for our oldest clients. Saw how Wyatt hired drivers based on how little they'd work for, not how well they could drive. Watched him cut corners on maintenance. 4 weeks ago, I pulled him aside after he chewed out Tomas, one of our best mechanics, for wasting time on preventive maintenance. You're dismantling everything we've built, I roared, my voice shaking with fury. You'll ruin us all, Wyatt. You're going to lose good people, I warned him. Wyatt laughed. Everyone's replaceable, Silas. That's business 101. I didn't argue, just went back to my routes, checking in with clients, making my deliveries, keeping things running while the foundation cracked beneath us. Little did I know I'd be the first one they'd decide to replace. He's a fool who paid dearly, I whispered, my resolve hardening as I drove my last route. After sitting for an hour, I finally checked those messages. Clive Peterson wanted to meet for coffee tomorrow. Nora from Great Plains Distributing asked if I had plans to drive for another company. Lila at Midwest Foods just sent a string of angry emojis, followed by call me. I went inside, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. Celeste was working late at the clinic. The house felt too quiet. I pulled out my logbooks, 16 years of routes, deliveries, relationships. Peak Pulse didn't own those. They'd fired the driver, but forgotten about the connections I'd built. My phone rang. It was Harlan. Must have heard the news through the grapevine. Damn shame what they're doing to my company, he said, voice gruff with age and anger. I never should have sold. You did what you had to do, I said, your partner's medical bills. Still, he cut in. I built that place on relationships, not spreadsheets. These new boys don't understand the business. They'll choke on their greed, I said, my voice fierce with conviction. We'll make them pay, Harlan. After we hung up, I stared at my hands, calloused, weathered from years of driving, loading, problem-solving. 16 years gone with a single signature. The next morning, I met Clive Peterson at Prairie Diner. He didn't waste time. They're idiots for letting you go, Clive growled, his eyes flashing with anger. You've saved us countless times, Silas. I heard what happened, he said, sliding into the booth. Bunch of idiots. You've personally saved our bacon more times than I can count. Just doing my job, I said. No, Clive shook his head. You did more than your job. Remember when our generator failed at the Fremont warehouse? You got that shipment to our backup facility at 3 a.m. in a blizzard? I shrugged. Freight doesn't wait for good weather. Clive leaned forward. We've got a contract with Peak Pulse, but it's got a 45-day termination clause. Who are you driving for next? Because that's where our business is going. You're betting on me, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. I won't fail you, Clive. I hadn't even thought about next steps yet, but Clive's words planted a seed. By lunchtime, I'd met with Nora from Great Plains, who said the same thing. By dinner, 4 more clients had reached out with similar messages. Driving home, I passed Peak Pulse's yard, saw my old truck, already reassigned to that young driver. Through the office windows, I could see Wyatt in a meeting, pointing at charts on a screen. That's when it hit me. Wyatt saw drivers as interchangeable parts, but clients saw us as relationships. For 16 years, I'd been the face of Peak Pulse to most of our major accounts. I wasn't just a driver, I was their trusted partner. I pulled into my driveway, mind racing, called my buddy Raul, who'd left Peak Pulse last year to drive for a competitor. They've handed us an empire, I said, my voice alight with purpose. Let's seize it, Raul. What would it take, I asked, to start our own outfit? Raul was quiet for a moment. You serious about this, Silas? Never been more serious in my life. You'd need capital, licenses, insurance. He started listing, and clients, I added, which I've got. That night, Celeste found me at the kitchen table surrounded by notes and calculations. "What's all this?" she asked. "It's our revenge," I said, my eyes burning with determination. "I'm building a new freight empire." I said slowly, "I'm starting a freight company." 4 days after being fired, I walked back into Peak Pulse's office, not to beg for my job, I was past that, but to collect the personal items from my locker and talk to a few of the drivers I'd mentored over the years. Wyatt spotted me in the break room, talking with Javier and Emilio, 2 drivers who'd started under my guidance. "You're sabotaging my company," Wyatt roared, storming over, his face red with fury. "Get out before I call security." His face darkened as he marched over. "Silas, this is private property," he said. "You can't just walk in and disrupt operations." "Just collecting my things," I said, holding up my old thermos and the family photo that had been in my locker and saying goodbye to friends. Wyatt crossed his arms. "You're stealing our clients," he accused, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll bury you for this, Silas." "I've heard you've been talking to our clients, so that's what this was about." Word travels fast in the freight business. "They called me," I corrected, "to ask why I wasn't delivering their shipments anymore." "Stop hiding behind lies," Wyatt snapped. "You're destroying us." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm just answering my phone, Wyatt." "Well, stop it," Wyatt snapped. "Those are Peak Pulse accounts. Interfering with our client relationships could be construed as tortious interference with business relationships." He pronounced each word like he'd rehearsed it with a lawyer. Maybe he had. "Can't control who calls me," I said, keeping my voice even, "or what decisions they make about their shipping needs." Wyatt stepped closer. "Listen carefully, Silas. You signed non-compete and non-solicitation agreements when you joined Peak Pulse. If you try to poach our clients, we'll bury you in legal fees." I hadn't expected this. Folks couldn't afford a legal battle, 16 years of loyalty, and now they were threatening to sue me for taking phone calls. "Check those agreements," I said, remembering something important. "They expired after 12 years, Harlan made sure of that. Wyatt's face flushed. He clearly hadn't done his homework. Regardless, he recovered. "This is your one warning. Stay away from our clients." I nodded, picked up my things, and walked out. In the parking lot, Javier and Emilio caught up with me. "He's wrecking everything," Javier whispered, his voice tense with fear. "We're next, Silas. He's running this place into the ground," Javier muttered, cutting corners on maintenance, pushing drivers to break hours of service rules. "3 guys quit last week," Emilio added. "Replace them with rookies who'll work for peanuts." I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach tighten, not just for the business implications, but for safety. Poorly maintained trucks and overworked drivers were a recipe for disaster. "You two be careful," was all I said. Back home, I called Harlan to ask about those agreements. "They're bluffing," Harlan growled, his voice thick with indignation. "They can't cage you, Silas. Fight back." He confirmed what I remembered. The non-compete and non-solicitation clauses had expired years ago. "I never believed in tying people down forever," he explained. "Good business is built on choice, not force." The next day, I got a certified letter from Peak Pulse's lawyers anyway, threatening legal action if I continued soliciting their clients. Pure intimidation. They had no case, but they hoped I wouldn't know that or couldn't afford to fight it. That same afternoon, Clive Peterson called. "They're robbing us blind," Clive fumed, his voice shaking with rage. "Peak Pulse raised our rates 20% overnight. Peak Pulse just tried to raise our rates by 20% with no explanation," he fumed. "When I mentioned your name, their sales guy got all squirrely." One by one, similar calls came in. Peak Pulse was scrambling to lock down clients using strong-arm tactics and sudden rate hikes. Classic desperation moves. That evening, Raul came over with burgers and soda. "They're handing us their empire," Raul said, his eyes alight with excitement. "Let's take it all, Silas." We sat hammering out a business plan. He'd already pulled together information on insurance, licensing requirements, and startup costs. The numbers were daunting, but not impossible, especially if we started with just 3 trucks. "We'd need a solid base of guaranteed contracts," Raul said, taking a sip of soda. I looked at my phone, which had been buzzing with client messages all day. "I don't think that's going to be a problem." 1 week later, I was sitting in a small office I'd rented in an industrial park on the west side of Omaha. Raul had tapped his savings, I'd pulled money from investments, and together we'd secured financing for 3 trucks. Didn't seem like much compared to Peak Pulse's fleet, but it was a start. We'd filed the paperwork to establish Navarro and Ortiz Freight LLC, applied for our DOT authority, got the insurance squared away. Expensive, but our clean driving records helped. Even found a decent used truck that would be ready next week. What I hadn't expected was the call from Talia, Peak Pulse's longtime dispatcher. "Silas, you got a minute?" Her voice was hushed, like she was hiding in a supply closet. "Always, Talia. What's going on?" "It's worse than you know," she said. "After you left, Wyatt brought in some consultant who's been going through all the contracts, looking for ways to squeeze more money out of everyone." She paused, and I heard papers shuffling. "But that's not the worst part. They're planning to shut down the Omaha operation entirely in 8 months, move everything to Sioux Falls where they've got some tax incentive deal. Everyone here is getting laid off. They just don't know it yet." The news hit me like a physical blow. Peak Pulse had been an Omaha fixture for decades. 50-some families depended on those jobs. "How sure are you about this?" I asked. 100%. I saw the documents myself when I was filing. Wyatt left them on his desk, real careless. "They're betraying us all," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "We'll save them, Talia. I swear it." After she hung up, I sat at my empty desk, staring at the wall. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the people who'd be blindsided 8 months from now. Raul arrived with coffee and bagels, excited about the used Freightliner he'd found at a good price. He stopped short when he saw my face. "What happened?" I told him what Talia had shared. His expression hardened as I spoke. "So all this talk about efficiency and streamlining was just smoke," he said. "They were planning to dump everyone anyway. Seems that way." Raul sat down, coffee forgotten. "We need to think bigger, Silas." "What do you mean?" "If they're shutting down in 8 months anyway, we should be planning to pick up as much of that business as possible. Not just a client here and there. All of it. Let's build an empire from their ashes," Raul said, his voice fierce with ambition. He was right. This wasn't about getting back at Wyatt or even saving my own career anymore. It was about preserving what Harlan had built. The relationships, the trust, the jobs. We spent the rest of the day revising our business plan, called our bank contact about financing for more trucks, researched warehouse space that could serve as a modest terminal. By evening, we had the outlines of something much more ambitious than our original 3-truck operation. The next morning, I called Harlan and asked him to meet me for lunch. I laid out everything, what Talia had told me, what Raul and I were planning, the challenges we faced. The old man listened quietly, hands folded on the table. When I finished, he nodded once. "How much do you need?" he asked. "Sir?" "For startup capital. I've got some money set aside, was saving it for RV, but this seems more important." I hadn't expected this. "We couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Harlan cut me off. "I'm offering. Those people at Peak Pulse, most of them I hired myself, known their families for years. I'll be damned if I'll sit by while some corporate vulture scatters them to the wind." "You're giving us a chance to win," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We'll make you proud, Harlan." He pulled out his checkbook, right there in the restaurant. "Let's build something right this time," he said, "something that lasts." Over the next 3 weeks, Navarro, Ortiz, and Harlan Freight took shape with startling speed. Harlan's investment, combined with our own resources and a business loan, gave us enough capital to lease 6 trucks, secure a small terminal with a warehouse, and hire key personnel. We started with the essentials. Talia gave notice at Peak Pulse and joined us as dispatcher. 3 experienced mechanics followed. Sick of Peak Pulse's corner cutting on maintenance, we hired 6 drivers, all veterans with stellar safety records who had either already left Peak Pulse or were planning to. The trucks arrived. 4 Freightliners and 2 Volvos. Nothing fancy, but solid, reliable machines. We painted them forest green with gold trim, our new company logo on the doors. Each morning, I'd arrive at our modest terminal before dawn and feel a surge of pride seeing those trucks lined up, ready to roll. Meanwhile, Peak Pulse was spiraling. After I left, 4 major clients had pulled their business, not to us, not yet, but to competitors. They'd cited service concerns, but really, they were waiting to see if our new operation could handle their needs. Word of the Sioux Falls move had leaked. Morale at Peak Pulse was rock bottom. Drivers were jumping ship weekly. Deliveries were being missed. Wyatt was in full panic mode, slashing rates to keep clients while cutting corners everywhere else. "He's destroying himself," Talia said one morning, her voice grim with satisfaction. "Peak Pulse is bleeding out." We moved carefully, building our infrastructure before taking on too much business. Harlan insisted on doing things right: proper training, thorough maintenance protocols, fair pay scales. "The money will follow if we focus on quality," he kept saying. By the 4th week, we were ready to approach clients directly. I started with Prairie Provisions, my longest relationship. Clive Peterson met me in his office, examined our rate sheets, insurance certificates, and driver qualifications, asked tough questions about capacity and contingency plans. "You're rebuilding trust," Clive said, his voice warm with respect. "That's what sets you apart, Silas." "This all looks solid, Silas," he said finally, "but Peak Pulse just dropped their rates below yours. They're desperate to keep us." "They can't sustain those rates," I replied, "and they can't match our service. Plus, there's something you should know." I told him about the Sioux Falls move. Clive's face darkened. "They betrayed us," he growled, his voice thick with fury. "They swore they'd stay local, so all their promises about local service and quick response times will be impossible to keep once they relocate." Clive nodded slowly. "We'll need to phase this transition carefully. Can't afford any supply chain disruptions." "We've got a plan for that," I assured him, outlining our gradual implementation strategy. By the end of the meeting, we had a handshake deal. Prairie Provisions would move 25% of their shipping to us immediately, with the rest transitioning over 75 days. Similar conversations played out with Great Plains Distributing, Midwest Foods, and 7 other major clients. Not all signed immediately, but most started shifting portions of their business our way. We weren't just taking clients, we were taking the good people too. Every week, another Peak Pulse employee would approach us looking for work. We couldn't hire them all, but we took the best: experienced dispatchers, skilled mechanics, reliable driver. Then came the moment that confirmed we were on the right path. Javier, the driver I'd mentored who was still at Peak Pulse, called one evening. "Silas, you won't believe this. Wyatt just announced they lost the Keystone Industrial account. Keystone was Peak Pulse's biggest client, 35% of their business. What happened?" "Word is they found out about the Sioux Falls move from one of their contacts at Great Plains. They've already signed with someone else." I asked the obvious question, "Who'd they sign with?" Javier laughed. "That's the best part. Not you guys. They went with Continental Logistics. Wyatt's been running around screaming that you somehow engineered it, but everyone knows it's his own fault." "He's reaping his own destruction," I said, my voice steady with triumph. The plan was working, better than we'd hoped. We didn't need to actively poach all of Peak Pulse's business. The company was imploding on its own. 3 months after being fired, I was back behind the wheel, delivering a critical shipment to Prairie Provisions. Their main production line had suffered a malfunction, and they needed replacement parts by morning, just like old times. Except now, the truck I drove had my name on the door. As I backed up to Prairie Provisions' loading dock at 3:00 IE, Clive himself was waiting, despite the early hour. "You're our savior, Silas," Clive said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You've never let us down." "You're a lifesaver, Silas," he said as I handed him the manifest. "Our production manager says we can be back online within 3 hours now." I helped unload, then joined Clive in his office for coffee. He seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just waiting for confirmation on something," he said, pouring more coffee. "Should be any minute now." His phone buzzed. He read the message, then smiled. "It's official. As of this morning, we've terminated our contract with Peak Pulse. You're now handling 100% of our freight." I knew this was coming. We'd been gradually taking on more of their business, but hearing it formalized still felt momentous. "Appreciate your trust," I said simply. "Trust is why you got it," Clive replied, "but you should know you're not the only one. Great Plains Distributing cut ties with them yesterday, Midwest Foods the day before. From what I hear, Peak Pulse has lost 85% of their Omaha business in the last 8 weeks. On the drive back to our terminal, I passed Peak Pulse's yard. The lot was half empty. A for-lease sign had appeared on the fence. Through the office window, I could see Wyatt on the phone, gesturing frantically. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected, just a quiet sense that things were working out as they should. We hadn't stolen anything, we'd simply built something better. Something based on the values that had always mattered in this business. Back at our terminal, Harlan met me in the break room. "Have you heard?" he asked. "About Peak Pulse losing most of their clients?" "Yeah," Harlan shook his head. "More than that. They're declaring bankruptcy, effective immediately." 7 months after being fired from Peak Pulse, I stood in the yard of Navarro, Ortiz, and Harland Freight, watching our fleet, now 18 trucks strong, head out for the day's deliveries. Our small terminal had expanded to include a proper warehouse and maintenance facility. We employed 38 people, most of them former Peak Pulse workers. Peak Pulse Freight no longer existed. After the bankruptcy, their assets had been liquidated, their contracts scattered to various competitors. We'd acquired 4 of their trucks at auction, good machines that had been poorly maintained. Our mechanics had spent weeks getting them back into proper shape. Wyatt had left town. Last I heard, he'd taken a position with a logistics firm in Albuquerque. The investment group that had bought Peak Pulse from Harlan had written off the entire venture as a loss. Harlan joined me in the yard, leaning on his cane. At 75, he wasn't actively managing day-to-day operations, but he came by most mornings to have coffee with the drivers and share his wisdom. "We've reclaimed what they stole," I said, my voice thick with pride. "This is our victory, Harlan." "Never thought I'd be back in the freight business," he mused, watching a freightliner pull out, loaded with agricultural equipment, bound for Des Moines. "Having regrets?" I asked. He laughed. "Hell no. Best decision I've made in years." We walked back inside, where Talia was coordinating the day's routes. Raul was reviewing maintenance schedules with our lead mechanic. The place hummed with purposeful activity. "You know what makes this work?" Harlan said, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "It's not the trucks or the contracts or even the capital. It's the people." He wasn't wrong. We'd built something valuable because we valued the right things. That afternoon, I took a rare day off with Celeste. "We've won," I whispered, my voice steady with triumph, "and it feels like justice." "Happy?" she asked simply. I considered the question. "Yeah," I said, "I am. Sometimes the long haul isn't about the miles. It's about the journey back to what matters."